There are moments in life when everything changes in a single heartbeat, when the world you knew disappears, and all that remains is silence. This is the story of one of those moments. This is the story of a promise that crossed the boundary between two worlds. This is the story of a cat named Blend, and the man who loved him more than anything else in this world. It was a cold November morning when Thomas woke up and didn't hear the usual sound. The soft padding of paws on the wooden floor. The gentle purr that always greeted him before dawn. For 15 years, every single morning had begun the same way. Blend would jump onto the bed, walk across his chest, and press his small head against Thomas's cheek. It was their ritual, their language. But that morning there was only silence. Thomas sat up slowly, his heart already knowing what his mind refused to accept. He found Blend in the corner of the living room, curled into a tight ball, his breathing shallow and labored. The old cat's golden eyes opened slightly when he heard Thomas approach, and in that gaze, there was something that shattered every wall Thomas had ever built around his heart. It was a look that said goodbye. The veterinarian's words felt like stones dropping into deep water. Kidney failure, advanced stage. There was nothing more they could do. Thomas held Blend in his arms as the doctor spoke, feeling the fragile body that had once been so strong, so full of life, now weighing almost nothing. He remembered the day he had found him. A tiny kitten, barely 4 weeks old, abandoned in a cardboard box behind a grocery store on a rainy afternoon. Thomas had been walking home from the worst day of his life. He had just lost his job. His wife had left him 6 months before. He had no reason to stop, no reason to care. But when he heard that small, desperate cry cutting through the sound of the rain, something inside him broke open. He picked up that soaking wet kitten, tucked him inside his jacket and carried him home. That night, as the kitten slept on his chest, Thomas cried for the first time in years, and in the morning, when he woke up to find those huge golden eyes staring at him with absolute trust, he made a promise. He would never abandon this small creature. He would give him the best life he possibly could. He would be there no matter what. And he was. Through everything. When Thomas rebuilt his life. When he found a new job. When he met Sarah and fell in love again. When they got married in a small ceremony where Blend sat on the front row, wearing a tiny bow tie that made everyone laugh. When Sarah got pregnant, and they brought home their daughter, Emma. Blend had been there for all of it, not just present but essential. A quiet guardian, a faithful companion, a member of the family who asked for nothing except to be near them. Now, as Thomas sat in the veterinary clinic, holding Blend's weakening body, he felt the weight of every moment they had shared pressing down on his chest. The doctor left them alone in the small room, and Thomas whispered into Blend's ear, "I'm here, buddy. I'm right here. I won't leave you. I promised, remember? I promised I'd always be here." Blend's purr was so faint it was almost impossible to hear, but Thomas felt it vibrating against his hands. That small motor of contentment that had accompanied so many quiet evenings, so many difficult nights, so many perfect ordinary moments. He made the decision that every pet owner dreads, the decision that feels like betrayal, even though it's the ultimate act of love. He asked the doctor to help Blend go peacefully, to end the pain, to let him rest. And as the injection was administered, as Thomas held Blend close and whispered every word of love and gratitude he could find, he watched those golden eyes slowly close for the last time. The purring stopped. The small body went still, and Thomas felt something inside himself die too. The drive home was the longest of his life. Sarah was waiting with Emma, who was now 7 years old. When she saw her father's face, Emma understood immediately. She ran to him, wrapped her small arms around his waist and cried into his shirt. Sarah held them both, tears streaming down her face. That night, they buried Blend in the backyard, under the old oak tree where he used to sit and watch the birds. Thomas carved a small wooden marker with the words, "Blend, the best friend I ever had, 2009 to 2024. Days turned into weeks. The house felt impossibly empty. Thomas would wake up expecting to feel that familiar weight on his chest, only to remember. He would reach down to pet Blend while watching television, his hand finding only empty air. Every corner of the house held a memory. The windowsill where Blend loved to sunbathe. The kitchen counter where he would sit and supervise every meal preparation. The spot on the couch that still held the impression of his body. Thomas tried to move on. He threw himself into work. He spent more time with Emma. He and Sarah talked about maybe adopting another cat. But every time they visited a shelter, Thomas felt a wall go up inside him. None of them were Blend. None of them could be. It felt like a betrayal to even consider it. So he shut down that part of himself, the part that could love that deeply, the part that could be that vulnerable. One evening, about 2 months after Blend's death, Thomas was working late in his home office. The house was quiet. Sarah and Emma had gone to bed hours ago. He was staring at his computer screen, not really seeing it, when he heard something. A soft sound, almost like a meow. He froze. His heart began to race. He told himself he was imagining it. Grief playing tricks on his exhausted mind. But then he heard it again, clearer this time. Definitely a meow. Thomas stood up slowly and walked into the hallway. The sound was coming from downstairs, from the living room. He descended the stairs, his hands shaking, his breath caught in his throat. The living room was dark except for the pale moonlight streaming through the windows. And there, sitting in the middle of the floor, exactly where Blend used to sit, was a cat. But it wasn't Blend. This cat was younger, smaller, with a coat that was darker, almost black. Yet there was something in the way it looked at him, something in those eyes that made Thomas's knees weak. The cat stood up and walked toward him, and Thomas noticed it was limping. Its left front paw was injured, leaving small spots of blood on the floor. Without thinking, Thomas knelt down. The cat came directly to him, pressed its head against his hand, and began to purr. Thomas carried the injured cat to the kitchen, found the old first aid kit they had kept for Blend, and carefully cleaned and bandaged the wounded paw. The cat sat perfectly still through the entire process, as if it understood Thomas was trying to help, as if it trusted him completely. When he finished, the cat jumped down from the counter and walked to Blend's old food bowl, which Sarah hadn't been able to throw away. It sat down beside it and looked up at Thomas expectantly. That's when Thomas broke down. He slid down the kitchen wall and sat on the floor, sobbing so hard his entire body shook. And the cat, this mysterious creature that had appeared out of nowhere, walked over to him, climbed into his lap, and pressed its small head against his chest, right over his heart. Just like Blend used to do. And in that moment, Thomas felt something he hadn't felt in 2 months. A small crack in the wall he had built, a tiny opening where light could get through. He named the cat Midnight. When Sarah and Emma came downstairs in the morning and found Thomas asleep on the kitchen floor with the small black cat curled up on his chest, they didn't ask questions. They just knew. Sometimes the universe sends us exactly what we need, exactly when we need it. Not as a replacement, but as a reminder that love doesn't end. It transforms. Midnight's paw healed quickly. Within a week, he was running through the house, exploring every corner, claiming his territory. But there were moments that made Thomas stop and stare. Moments when Midnight would sit in exactly the same spots Blend had favored, when he would perform the same odd little habits, the way he would knock his water bowl slightly to the left before drinking, the way he would chirp at birds through the window, the way he would follow Thomas from room to room, never letting him out of sight. Thomas tried to dismiss it as coincidence. Cats were cats. They had similar behaviors. But there were other things that couldn't be explained so easily. Like the first time Emma was sick with a fever, and Midnight spent the entire night curled up beside her, exactly as Blend had done whenever she was unwell. Or the time Sarah had a panic attack, and Midnight appeared from nowhere, pressed against her chest, purring loudly until her breathing slowed. These weren't random acts. They were intentional, protective, almost as if Midnight knew exactly what each of them needed. One Saturday afternoon, Thomas was in the backyard pulling weeds near Blend's grave. Midnight was following him as usual, weaving between his legs, occasionally pouncing on a falling leaf. Thomas found himself talking to the small wooden marker. "I miss you, old friend. Every single day. I don't know if you can hear me. I don't know if there's anything after this. But if there is, I hope you're at peace. I hope you know how much you meant to us." Midnight suddenly jumped up onto Blend's grave and sat perfectly still, staring directly at Thomas. And in that moment, the wind picked up, rustling the leaves of the oak tree in a sound that was almost like a whisper. Thomas felt a chill run down his spine, not from fear but from something else, something that felt like recognition, like being seen. "Is it you?" Thomas whispered, his voice breaking. "Is it really you?" Midnight blinked slowly, that cat gesture that means love and trust and connection. Then he stood up, walked over to Thomas, and rubbed his head against Thomas's hand. And Thomas understood something in that moment, something profound and impossible and absolutely true. Love doesn't die. It doesn't disappear. It finds a way back. Maybe not in the way we expect, maybe not in the form we recognize at first, but it returns. Because real love, true love, is stronger than death itself. Thomas picked up Midnight and held him close, and he felt something he hadn't felt since Blend died. He felt whole, not because Midnight was Blend, but because Midnight carried something of Blend with him, a spark, a essence, a promise kept. That night after dinner, the family sat together in the living room. Emma was doing her homework on the floor. Sarah was reading a book on the couch. Thomas was in his armchair, and Midnight was curled up in his lap, purring steadily. It was an ordinary evening, a simple moment, but Thomas felt tears streaming down his face, and this time they weren't tears of grief. They were tears of gratitude. "Thank you," he whispered, so quietly that no one else could hear. "Thank you for coming back. Thank you for keeping your promise." Midnight's purring grew louder, and Thomas could swear he heard a response in that sound. A message carried through vibrations and warmth, and the inexplicable bond between a human and a cat. "I told you I would always be here. I told you I would never really leave. Love doesn't end, Thomas, it just changes form. And I will keep coming back, in whatever way I can, for as long as you need me." Years passed. Midnight grew into a magnificent cat, sleek and strong and utterly devoted to his family. There were still moments when Thomas would catch glimpses of Blend in him, a certain look, a particular gesture. But he stopped trying to analyze it. He stopped trying to understand it rationally. He simply accepted it as a gift, a mystery, a grace. Emma grew up with Midnight by her side. When she struggled with anxiety in middle school, Midnight would sleep on her bed every night, his presence a steady comfort. When she left for college, Midnight sat by the front door for 3 days, waiting for her return. And when she came home for Thanksgiving, he greeted her with such joy that everyone in the family cried. Thomas grew older. His hair turned grey, then white. His steps became slower. His back bent a little more each year. But through it all, Midnight was there, always within sight, always within reach, a constant in a world of change. One winter evening when Thomas was 73 years old, he had a heart attack. It was sudden and severe. Sarah called the ambulance, and Thomas was rushed to the hospital. For 3 days he hovered between life and death, and during those 3 days Midnight refused to eat. He sat by the front door, waiting, watching, hoping. When Thomas finally came home, weak but alive, Midnight was there to greet him. The old cat, now 15 years old himself, walked slowly to Thomas and climbed carefully onto his lap. And Thomas, holding this creature who had been his companion for so long, whispered, "You're still keeping the promise, aren't you? Even now, even after all this time." That night, as Thomas lay in bed with Midnight curled up beside him, he dreamed. He dreamed he was young again, walking through a sunlit field, and running toward him through the tall grass was Blend. Young and strong and full of life, Blend jumped into his arms and Thomas held him close, feeling that familiar warmth, hearing that familiar purr. And Blend spoke to him, not with words, but with something deeper, something that transcended language. "I kept my promise, Thomas. I told you I would always be here. And when the time comes when you take your final journey, I'll be waiting, right at the edge, ready to guide you home. Because that's what love does. It endures. It persists. It never ever gives up." Thomas woke up with tears on his face, and midnight pressed against his chest, purring steadily. And he understood, with a clarity that took his breath away, that death is not an ending. It's a doorway. And on the other side of that doorway, every love we've ever known is waiting. Every bond we've ever formed is preserved. Every promise we've ever made is kept. Years continued to pass. Thomas and Midnight grew old together. They moved slowly through the house, two ancient souls bound by something that transcended time and space. Sarah would watch them together and smile through her tears, knowing that she was witnessing something sacred, something rare. On a spring morning, when the world was bright with new life and possibility, Thomas woke up feeling strange, light, almost weightless. Midnight was on his chest, staring into his eyes with an intensity that was startling, and Thomas knew. He simply knew. This was his last day. He didn't tell Sarah, he didn't want to frighten her, but he spent that day saying goodbye in small ways. He held her hand a little longer. He told Emma he loved her when she called. He sat in the backyard under the oak tree, with Midnight in his lap, and he spoke to Blend's grave one last time. "I'm ready," he said quietly. "I've had a good life, a long life, and I've loved deeply. Thank you for teaching me that. Thank you for showing me that love is the only thing that really matters, the only thing that lasts." That night, Thomas went to bed early. Midnight curled up beside him, closer than usual, his small body pressed against Thomas's side. And as Thomas closed his eyes, feeling sleep pulling him down into darkness, he felt something else too. A presence, a warmth, a light. He opened his eyes and found himself standing in that sunlit field from his dream. And there, running toward him through the tall grass, was Blend, young and perfect and radiant with joy. Thomas dropped to his knees, and Blend leaped into his arms. The purr that filled Thomas's ears was like music, like coming home. "You kept your promise," Thomas whispered, holding Blend close. "You were always there, in midnight, in every moment. You never really left." Blend pressed his head against Thomas's chest, right over his heart, and Thomas felt a love so vast and powerful that it seemed to fill the entire universe. And he understood, finally and completely, that this is what we're here to learn. This is the whole lesson. Love, simply love. Love without condition. Love without fear. Love that persists beyond death itself. In the morning, Sarah found Thomas in bed, peaceful and still, with a small smile on his face. Midnight was curled up beside him, purring softly. And when Sarah gently lifted the old cat away, she could have sworn she saw two Blends moving across the wall, one large and one small, walking together into the light. At Thomas's funeral, Emma spoke about her father's love for Blend and Midnight, about how he had taught her that the bonds we form with animals are not less than human bonds. They're different, but equally profound, equally sacred, and that if we pay attention, if we truly open our hearts, animals teach us the most important lessons about love, loyalty, forgiveness, and grace. Midnight lived for 2 more years after Thomas's death. He stayed with Sarah, keeping her company through her grief, reminding her that love continues even when the beloved is gone. And when Midnight's own time came, he passed peacefully in his sleep, curled up in Thomas's favorite armchair. Emma buried him next to Blend, under the oak tree. She carved a marker that read, "Midnight, the promise kept, the love returned." And sometimes on quiet evenings, when the light slants just right through the trees, Sarah swears she can see them. 3 Blends moving together through the backyard, a man and 2 cats, walking side by side, home at last. Because this is the truth that Blend and Midnight taught Thomas, and that Thomas taught his family, and that they now share with the world. Love is eternal. It transcends bodies and lifetimes. It persists through every ending and every beginning. And when we love purely, when we love without reservation, we create something that can never be destroyed. We create a promise that will be kept forever. This is the story of Blend and Midnight and Thomas. But it's also your story. And mine. It's the story of every human who has ever loved an animal and been loved in return. It's the story of the promises we make and the promises that are made to us. It's the story of a bond that death cannot break. And it's a reminder that right now, in this very moment, we are surrounded by opportunities to love, to connect, to create these eternal bonds. Every animal that crosses our path is an invitation. Every pair of eyes that meets ours is a doorway. And if we're brave enough to walk through it, if we're willing to risk the inevitable pain of loss for the incredible gift of love, we discover something miraculous. We discover that we are never truly alone, that we are held by connections stronger than death, that every love we give creates a light that will guide us home when our own journey ends. So pay attention. Look into the eyes of the animals around you. See them. Really see them, because they are not just pets. They are not just companions, they are teachers. They are mirrors. They are promises wrapped in fur and whiskers and purrs. And somewhere right now, there is an animal waiting for you, waiting to teach you about love, waiting to keep a promise you don't even know has been made yet. All you have to do is open your heart and say yes. The story never really ends. It just continues, in different forms, in different moments. But always, always it continues. This is the last promise, the eternal promise, the promise that love makes to every heart brave enough to give it and receive it. And it's a promise that will never, ever be broken.